The morning mist clung to the grounds of Kensington Palace like a protective veil, hiding the secrets that lay within its ancient walls. Catherine Middleton, the Princess of Wales, stood at her bedroom window, her fingers wrapped around a steaming cup of tea that had long since grown cold. The familiar ache in her chest had become her constant companion over the past 3 months, ever since William had left for what was supposed to be a brief diplomatic mission to Australia and New Zealand. What had started as a 2-week royal tour had stretched into an endless absence that no one could fully explain. The official statements spoke of extended engagements, important Commonwealth relations, and unexpected opportunities to strengthen diplomatic ties. But Catherine knew the truth that palace officials carefully concealed from the press and the public. William had asked to extend his stay indefinitely, requesting time away from royal duties, from the pressure, and from her. The children had stopped asking when Papa would come home after the first month. George, now 11, had developed a quiet maturity that broke Catherine's heart. He would catch her staring at her phone, waiting for calls that came less and less frequently, and would gently take her hand without saying a word. Charlotte, 9 years old and fierce like her great-grandmother, had declared that she didn't need Papa anyway because Mama was the strongest person in the world. Little Louis, barely 6, still set a place for his father at dinner every night, his innocent hope serving as a daily reminder of the family's fractured state. Catherine had thrown herself into her royal duties with an intensity that worried her staff. She visited hospitals, schools, and charities with a schedule that left little time for rest or reflection. Her team watched helplessly as she pushed herself beyond reasonable limits, accepting every engagement, every photo opportunity, every chance to be anywhere but alone with her thoughts. The public praised her dedication, unaware that each smile was carefully constructed, each wave a performance born from desperation rather than joy. The palace had become a theater where Catherine played the role of the composed princess while her world crumbled in private. She moved through the grand halls like a ghost, her footsteps echoing in spaces that once rang with family laughter. The staff, loyal and discreet, watched her with growing concern. They saw how she lingered at breakfast, hoping William might call during what would be his evening in Australia. They noticed how she kept his study exactly as he left it, down to the half-empty coffee cup still sitting on his desk. Maria, her longtime lady-in-waiting and closest confidant, had tried countless times to breach the wall Catherine had built around her emotions. "You need to talk to someone," Maria would say during their quiet moments together. "This silence isn't healthy for you or the children." But Catherine would simply shake her head, maintaining the facade that everything was manageable, that she was handling the separation with the grace expected of a future queen. The truth was far more complicated. Catherine's nights were filled with questions that had no answers. She would lie in their empty bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying their last conversation before he left. It had been ordinary, filled with discussions about the children's school schedules and upcoming royal engagements. There had been no warning, no indication that he was walking away from their life together. The kiss goodbye had been quick, distracted routine. How could she have known it would be their last moment of normalcy for months? The international press had begun to notice William's extended absence, though the palace's communications team worked tirelessly to control the narrative. They issued carefully worded statements about the prince's important work with environmental organizations and indigenous communities. Photographs were released showing William looking engaged and purposeful, but Catherine noticed what others missed. In every image, his eyes held a distance she had never seen before, even in their most difficult moments. She had tried calling him countless times in those first weeks, but their conversations had become stilted and formal. He spoke about his work, the people he was meeting, the causes he was supporting, but never about when he was coming home. When she asked directly, he would deflect, mentioning commitments that kept extending, opportunities that couldn't be missed. The man she had loved for over 2 decades had become a stranger speaking in diplomatic language. The breaking point had come 6 weeks into his absence. Catherine had been in the nursery, helping Lewis with his homework, when her phone buzzed with a text message from William. She had rushed to answer it, hope flooding her chest, only to find a formal message about postponing his return indefinitely. No explanation, no apology, no acknowledgement of what this meant for her or their children. Just cold, official words that felt like a knife through her heart. That night, after the children were asleep, Catherine had finally allowed herself to break down. She had sat on the floor of their bedroom closet, surrounded by William's clothes that still carried his scent, and sobbed until her body ached. The tears were for the loneliness that consumed her days, for the children who tried to be brave while missing their father, for the marriage she feared was slipping away despite all her efforts to hold it together. The next morning, she had rebuilt her walls stronger than before. She hired additional staff to help with the children, threw herself deeper into her charitable work, and began the painful process of learning to function as a single parent while maintaining the illusion of a united royal family. The performance became her survival mechanism, each public appearance a masterclass in royal composure while her private world crumbled. Friends and family had tried to offer support, but Catherine found herself unable to accept help. How could she explain that the man the world saw as devoted and loving had simply walked away without a real goodbye? How could she admit that she didn't know if he was coming back at all? The uncertainty was perhaps the cruelest part. If William had asked for a separation, she could have begun to heal. If he had explained his reasons, she could have tried to fix whatever was broken. Instead, she was trapped in limbo, maintaining hope while preparing for the worst. The children's routines became her anchor. Every morning, she would wake them with the same energy and enthusiasm she had always shown. She helped with homework, attended school events, and made sure their lives remained as normal as possible. But late at night, when they were safely asleep, she would allow herself moments of raw honesty about the fear that consumed her. What if William never came back? What if she was raising 3 future royals alone? What if love wasn't enough to bridge whatever chasm had opened between them? The palace staff had become her unofficial support system, though none would dare acknowledge the family crisis directly. The kitchen staff made sure she ate, even when she claimed she wasn't hungry. The security team quietly increased their vigilance, understanding that a mother's emotional state could affect her judgment. The nannies stepped up their involvement with the children, providing extra attention and care without being asked. Catherine's days blurred together in a routine of royal duties and single parenting. She attended state dinners alone, explaining William's absence with practiced ease. She represented the royal family at important events, her presence commanding and assured despite the emptiness she felt inside. The public saw strength and dedication. They had no idea that each smile was an act of will, each wave a triumph over despair. As autumn approached, Catherine had begun to accept that William might not return before Christmas. The thought of spending their first holiday apart in 20 years filled her with a grief so profound it sometimes took her breath away. She had started making tentative plans for a family Christmas without him, trying to imagine how to explain his absence to Lewis, who still believed Daddy was just working very hard and would be home soon. The international media had begun to speculate more boldly about William's extended absence. Royal correspondents asked pointed questions during press briefings, though the palace's responses remained frustratingly vague. Catherine could feel the walls closing in, knowing that eventually the truth of their separation would become impossible to hide. The thought of their private pain becoming public spectacle made her stomach churn. She had developed small rituals to cope with the emptiness. Every evening, she would walk through their private garden, the same path they had taken together thousands of times. She would sit on the bench where William had proposed all those years ago, allowing herself exactly 10 minutes to remember what they had built together before returning to the reality of what remained. The woman who had once been certain of her place in the world now questioned everything. Was she enough for the children? Could she fulfill her royal duties without her partner's support? Had she failed as a wife in ways she couldn't understand? The questions haunted her sleep and shadowed her waking hours. Yet despite the pain, Catherine discovered reserves of strength she hadn't known she possessed. She handled difficult conversations with palace officials, made decisions about the children's future, and maintained the dignity of her position even as her personal world fell apart. The realization that she was more capable than she had ever imagined was both empowering and heartbreaking. The turning point came on a gray Tuesday morning in early November. Catherine was in her office, reviewing plans for an upcoming charity gala, when her private secretary knocked softly on the door. The expression on his face was carefully neutral, but something in his eyes made her heart skip a beat. "Your Royal Highness," he said quietly, "there's been a development regarding the Prince of Wales." Catherine's hands stilled on the papers before her. After 3 months of silence, of careful non-answers and diplomatic deflections, something had changed. She could feel it in the air, in the way the staff moved with sudden purpose, in a tension that seemed to electrify the very walls of the palace. She straightened in her chair, drawing on months of practiced composure. Whatever was coming, she would face it with the dignity befitting her position, even if her heart was pounding with a mixture of hope and terror. "What kind of development?" she asked, her voice steady despite the chaos in her chest. The secretary glanced at the door, then back at her, as if checking for listening ears. "The prince is en route to London, Your Royal Highness. His flight landed an hour ago." The words hit her like a physical blow. After 3 months of absence, of silence, of questions without answers, William was coming home. But the secretary's carefully controlled expression told her this wasn't the joyful reunion she had dreamed of. This was something else entirely, something that would change everything once again. Catherine nodded slowly, her mind already racing through the implications. The children were at school, unaware that their world was about to shift again. The staff would need instructions on how to handle William's return. The media would undoubtedly catch wind of his arrival soon enough. But beneath all the practical considerations was the question that had haunted her for 3 months. Why now? Why was he coming back without warning, just as she had finally begun to accept his absence? And, most importantly, what did his return really mean for their family? As if reading her thoughts, the secretary added quietly, "He's requested a private meeting with you this afternoon, Your Royal Highness. No staff, no advisors, just the two of you." Catherine felt her breath catch. After months of formal text messages and brief, stilted phone calls, William wanted to see her alone. The conversation that would finally provide answers was only hours away, but she wasn't sure she was prepared for what she might learn. She stood slowly, walking to the window that overlooked the gardens where her children played, where she and William had walked together just months ago when their family was whole. In a few hours, she would know whether their marriage could be saved or if she would need to rebuild her life from the ground up. Either way, the waiting was finally over. The hours crawled by like years. Catherine found herself unable to concentrate on anything, moving through the palace like a woman in a trance. She changed clothes 3 times, each outfit feeling wrong for a conversation that could determine the fate of her marriage. Finally, she settled on a simple navy dress. The same color William had always said brought out her eyes. If this was to be their final conversation as husband and wife, she wanted to look like the woman he had fallen in love with. The staff seemed to sense the gravity of the situation without being told. They moved with unusual quiet efficiency, completing their tasks while giving Catherine a wide berth. Maria appeared at her side periodically, offering tea, conversation, or simply a reassuring presence. But Catherine was too lost in her own thoughts to accept any comfort. She kept replaying their last real conversation, searching for clues she might have missed. They had been discussing Charlotte's writing lessons, Lewis's upcoming school play, and George's struggles with mathematics. William had seemed distracted, but not unhappy. He had kissed her goodbye absently, his mind already on the tour ahead. There had been no warning, no indication that he was walking away from their life together. The uncertainty of not knowing what had driven him away was perhaps more painful than any concrete problem they might have faced. If he had told her he was unhappy, she could have worked to fix it. If he had said he felt overwhelmed by royal duties, they could have found solutions together. Instead, she was left to wonder if their entire marriage had been built on foundations she hadn't realized were crumbling. At 2 o'clock, her secretary appeared again, his expression carefully neutral. "The prince has arrived at the palace, Your Royal Highness. He's waiting in the blue drawing room." Catherine's heart hammered against her ribs. The blue drawing room had always been their sanctuary, the place where they escaped from formal royal protocol and simply existed as a family. It was where they had told the children about each pregnancy, where they had celebrated private anniversaries, where they had held each other during the darkest moments of their royal life. That William had chosen this room for their reunion felt significant, though she couldn't decide if it was a good sign or a cruel reminder of what they were losing. She walked through the palace corridors she knew by heart, each step echoing in the unusual quiet. The staff had clearly been instructed to make themselves scarce, giving the royal couple privacy for whatever was about to unfold. Catherine's hands trembled slightly as she reached for the door handle, and she paused for a moment to steel herself for whatever waited on the other side. William stood with his back to the door, looking out the large windows that faced the garden. He was thinner than when he had left, his shoulders carrying a tension she could see even from behind. His hair was longer, more casual than his usual carefully maintained style. He wore a simple sweater and jeans, clothes she had bought him for a birthday years ago, and the familiarity of seeing him in casual dress made her heart ache. "Hello, Catherine," he said without turning around. His voice was different, quieter, carrying a weight that hadn't been there before. "William." She closed the door softly behind her, unsure whether to approach him or maintain her distance. The man standing across the room was her husband, the father of her children, the person she had shared her life with for over 2 decades. But he also felt like a stranger, someone who had been absent so long that she wasn't sure how to behave around him anymore. He finally turned to face her, and Catherine felt her breath catch. The months in Australia had changed him in ways that went far deeper than his appearance. His eyes, once warm and familiar, now held a distance that made him seem unreachable. There were new lines around those eyes, evidence of whatever internal struggle had kept him away from home for so long. "You look well," he said, though his tone suggested it was more observation than compliment. "Thank you," she replied, her voice steadier than she had expected. "You look different." They stood in awkward silence for a moment. Two people who had once been able to communicate without words, now struggling to find common ground for even basic conversation. Catherine wanted to run to him, to hold him, and demand explanations for the months of pain he had caused. But something in his demeanor warned her to keep her distance. "How are the children?" William asked, moving to sit in one of the blue velvet armchairs that gave the room its name. "They're well. They miss you." Catherine remained standing, unable to relax enough to sit down. "George has been helping me with Louis's homework. Charlotte has taken up painting. They've all been very brave about your absence, though Louis still sets a place for you at dinner every night." She watched William's face carefully as she spoke, looking for any sign of the emotion she expected him to feel when hearing about his children. There was a flicker of something, pain perhaps, but it was quickly suppressed. "That's good," he said simply. "I'm glad they're adjusting well." The casual dismissal of their children's struggle hit Catherine like a slap. "Adjusting well?" she repeated, her carefully maintained composure beginning to crack. "William, they haven't been adjusting well. They've been heartbroken. Louis cries himself to sleep asking when Daddy is coming home. George has taken on responsibilities no 11-year-old should have to carry. Charlotte pretends she doesn't need you because it's easier than admitting how much your absence hurts." William's jaw tightened, but his expression remained distant. "Children are resilient. They adapt to whatever situation they're given. They shouldn't have to adapt to their father abandoning them without explanation," Catherine said, her voice rising despite her attempts to remain calm. "William, what happened? Why did you stay away? Why didn't you come home?" For a long moment, William said nothing. He stared at his hands, folded in his lap, as if trying to find words for something that couldn't be adequately explained. When he finally looked up at her, Catherine saw something she had never seen in his eyes before: complete emotional exhaustion. "I couldn't come back," he said quietly. "I tried to several times. I would pack my bags, arrange transportation, prepare to return to London. But every time I got close to actually leaving Australia, I would panic. The thought of coming back to this life, to these responsibilities, to the constant pressure and expectations. I couldn't make myself get on the plane." Catherine felt her legs weaken and, finally, sank into the chair across from him. "So you just stayed away? For 3 months? Without telling me what was happening?" "I know how it sounds," William continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know how selfish and cruel it must seem. But, Catherine, I was drowning. For years, I've felt like I was slowly suffocating under the weight of what's expected of us. The constant scrutiny, the endless obligations, the knowledge that every decision we make affects not just our family, but the entire Commonwealth. I woke up every morning feeling trapped in a life I never chose." The words hung in the air between them like a physical presence. Catherine had known that William struggled with the burdens of royal life. They had discussed it many times over the years. But she had never realized the depth of his despair or how close he was to breaking under the pressure. "So what changed?" she asked. "Why did you come back now?" William stood up and began pacing, a habit he had developed when particularly agitated. "Because I realized that running away wasn't solving anything. The guilt of leaving you and the children was eating me alive. I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on anything. The work I was doing in Australia, the causes I was supporting, they all felt meaningless because I knew I was hiding from my real responsibilities." He stopped pacing and looked directly at her for the first time since she had entered the room. "I came back because I owe you an explanation. I owe the children a proper goodbye, if that's what this is. I owe it to myself to face what I've done instead of continuing to run from it." Catherine felt tears building behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "Aprupe Goodbia. William, are you saying you want a divorce?" "I'm saying I don't know what I want," he replied with brutal honesty. "I know that I love you and the children more than anything in this world. But I also know that I'm not the man I used to be. These months away have shown me that I'm capable of hurting the people I love most in ways I never thought possible. How can I promise you that I won't do it again?" The conversation was spiraling toward a conclusion Catherine wasn't prepared to face. She had spent months hoping for William's return, imagining their reunion, dreaming of their family being whole again. She had never considered that his homecoming might be the beginning of the end, rather than a new beginning. "So what happens now?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "I don't know," William admitted. "I came back because I realized that whatever happens between us, it needs to happen honestly. I can't keep running away from difficult conversations or hard decisions. You deserve better than that. The children deserve better than that." Catherine stood up abruptly, her composure finally cracking completely. "Don't you dare make this about what we deserve," she said, her voice shaking with anger. "You left us, William. You walked away from our marriage, from our family, from everything we built together. You made that choice. Don't pretend this is some noble gesture for our benefit." William's face showed the first real emotion since she had entered the room. His carefully controlled facade crumbled, revealing the pain and confusion underneath. "You're right," he said. "I'm not being noble. I'm being selfish again, trying to make myself feel better about the choices I've made. I hurt you in the worst possible way, and I don't know how to fix it." "Then, why did you come back?" Catherine demanded. "If you don't know how to fix it, if you're not even sure you want to try, why put us through this? The children are going to be so excited to see you, so hopeful that our family is going to be okay again. Are you prepared to break their hearts all over again?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. William sank back in his chair, his head in his hands. For several long minutes, the only sound in the room was the ticking of the antique clock on the mantelpiece. "I came back because I realized that love isn't enough," he said finally. "I love you and the children desperately, but love didn't stop me from leaving. Love didn't make me pick up the phone when you called. Love didn't bring me home when Lewis was sick or when Charlotte won her art competition or when George needed help with his school project. I came back because I need to understand why love wasn't enough and what it would take to make it enough." Catherine felt something shift inside her chest, a small crack in the wall of anger and hurt she had built around her heart. For the first time since he had walked back in her life, William was being completely honest about his struggles and his failures. "I've been seeing someone," he continued, and Catherine's blood went cold. "A therapist," he clarified quickly, seeing her expression. "In Australia. Dr. Sarah Mitchell. She specializes in helping people who feel trapped by circumstances beyond their control. She's been helping me understand why I felt like I had no choice but to run." The relief that he wasn't confessing to an affair was quickly replaced by a complex mixture of emotions Catherine couldn't quite identify. Hope that he was getting help. Hurt that he had sought support from a stranger instead of from her. Anger that he was working on himself while she struggled alone. "And what has Dr. Mitchell taught you?" Catherine asked, try to keep her voice neutral. "That running away is a symptom, not a solution. That the pressure I feel comes from how I perceive my role rather than the role itself. That I have more choices than I realized, but I need to be brave enough to make them." William looked up at her, his eyes pleading for understanding. "She's taught me that I can't heal our marriage until I heal myself. And that healing takes time, work, and honesty." Catherine absorbed this information, trying to process what it meant for their future. "Are you planning to continue therapy here in London?" "If you'll let me," William said. "Dr. Mitchell has colleagues here who work with similar issues. But, Catherine, I need you to know that I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not asking you to wait for me to figure out how to be the husband and father you deserve. I'm asking for the chance to try, without any promises about the outcome." The conversation had taken an unexpected turn. Catherine had prepared for anger, for explanations, for apologies. She hadn't prepared for her husband to return as a broken man, seeking not absolution, but the opportunity to rebuild himself from the ground up. "What about the children?" she asked. "They're going to have questions. They're going to want to know if you're staying, if we're going to be a family again. What do I tell them?" "Tell them the truth," William said. "That I made mistakes, that I'm trying to learn from them, and that how our family looks in the future depends on whether I can become the man they need me to be." Catherine walked to the window where William had been standing when she entered. The garden below was bare, trees stripped of leaves by autumn's passage. In a few months, spring would return, bringing new growth and fresh possibilities. But gardens required careful tending to flourish, constant attention, and patient nurturing. "I need time to think," she said without turning around. "This conversation, your return, the idea that we might be able to rebuild what we lost, it's too much to process all at once." "Of course," William said immediately. "I'm staying at a hotel tonight. I'll arrange to see the children tomorrow, if that's all right with you. I think we should tell them together, explain what's happening in terms they can understand." Catherine nodded, still facing the window. She could feel William moving behind her, preparing to leave, and the sound of his footsteps toward the door made her chest tighten with unexpected panic. After months of his absence, having him leave again, even temporarily, felt unbearable. "William," she called out as his hand reached for the door handle. "Yes." She turned to face him, memorizing his features as if he might disappear again at any moment. "I'm glad you came back. Not because I forgive you, not because I'm ready to pretend these months didn't happen, but because our children need to see their father take responsibility for his choices. Because I need to know that the man I married still exists somewhere underneath all this pain." William's eyes filled with tears he didn't try to hide. "He does, Catherine. I promise you he does. And I'm going to spend however long it takes to find him again." After he left, Catherine remained in the blue drawing room until well after dark. The children would be home from school soon, excited to share stories about their day, unaware that their world was about to shift once again. Tomorrow, She would help them navigate this new chapter of their lives. Tonight, she allowed herself to grieve for the marriage that had ended and to hope cautiously and quietly for whatever might grow in its place. The sound of children's laughter echoing through the palace halls the next morning felt both familiar and strange to Catherine. George, Charlotte, and Louis were having breakfast in the family dining room. Their animated conversation about school projects and weekend plans creating a soundtrack of normalcy that Catherine had worked hard to maintain during William's absence. But today, everything would change again. She watched her children from the doorway, memorizing this last moment of their innocence before they learned that their father was back, but that their family's future remained uncertain. George was helping Louis with his reading, while Charlotte drew elaborate pictures of horses in the margins of her homework. They had adapted to their father's absence with the resilience William had mentioned, but Catherine knew that adaptation and healing were two very different things. "Mama, are you feeling all right?" Charlotte asked, looking up from her artwork with the intuitive concern that had always been her gift and her burden. At 9 years old, she had already learned to read the adults around her with uncomfortable accuracy. "I'm fine, darling," Catherine said, moving into the room to join them. "Actually, I have something important to tell you all. Your father will be joining us this afternoon. He's back from Australia." The reaction was immediate and varied. Louis dropped his spoon with a clatter, his face lighting up with pure joy. "Papa's coming home? Today? Is he staying forever now?" George looked up from his book, his expression more cautious. As the eldest, he had shouldered the responsibility of being strong for his siblings, and his 11-year-old mind had already begun to process the complexities their father's extended absence represented. Charlotte continued drawing, but her hand had stilled. "Why didn't he tell us he was coming back?" she asked without looking up. "Why is it a surprise?" Catherine sat down at the table, choosing her words carefully. The children deserved honesty, but they also deserved protection from the full weight of adult problems they couldn't yet understand. "Sometimes grown-ups need time to think about important things," she explained. "Your father needed to spend time away to work through some feelings he was having. Now he's ready to talk to us about what happens next." "What kind of feelings?" Louis asked, his 6-year-old mind struggling to understand why anyone would want to be away from their family. "Was he sad? Did we make him sad?" The question hit Catherine like a physical blow. Despite all her efforts to protect the children from feeling responsible for their father's absence, Louis had still internalized the idea that he might have done something wrong. "No, sweetheart," Catherine said firmly, kneeling beside his chair. "You and George and Charlotte did nothing wrong. Sometimes adults have problems that have nothing to do with the people they love most. Papa's feelings weren't about you at all." George closed his book and looked directly at his mother. "Are you and Papa getting divorced?" he asked with the directness that often caught adults off guard. Catherine felt her breath catch. George had always been perceptive, but hearing such a mature question from her young son reminded her how much their family crisis had forced him to grow up too quickly. "I don't know what's going to happen between Papa and me," she answered honestly. "That's what we need to talk about. But I want you all to know that no matter what, you are loved completely by both of us. Nothing that happens between your father and me changes how much we love you." Charlotte finally looked up from her drawing, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I don't want to talk to him," she said quietly. "He left us. He didn't call enough. He missed my art show and George's football match and Louis's first loose tooth. If he comes back now, it's just because he feels bad, not because he wants to be here." The pain in her daughter's voice broke Catherine's heart. Charlotte had inherited her own protective instincts and had been the most vocal about being fine without their father. But her anger revealed how deeply his absence had hurt her. "You don't have to say anything you don't want to say," Catherine assured her. "But I think it might be good to listen to what Papa has to tell us. Sometimes people make mistakes, even people we love, and it's important to hear them explain why." The conversation continued through breakfast, with each child processing the news differently. Louis bounced between excitement and anxiety, asking rapid-fire questions about whether Papa would read him bedtime stories and help with his Lego projects. George maintained his careful composure, but asked thoughtful questions about logistics and timing that revealed his deeper concerns. Charlotte remained skeptical, her protective armor firmly in place. After the children left for school, Catherine found herself alone with her thoughts and the weight of the afternoon ahead. She had agreed to let William meet with the children together, presenting a united front despite their fractured marriage. It would be their first time functioning as co-parents rather than partners, and she wasn't sure how to navigate that distinction. The morning passed slowly as Catherine attempted to focus on her royal duties. She reviewed briefing documents for upcoming engagements, responded to correspondence, and met with her private secretary about scheduling concerns. But her mind kept drifting to the conversation ahead and what it would mean for their family's future. Maria found her in her office just before lunch, staring out the window at the garden where the children would be playing if it weren't a school day. "How are you feeling about this afternoon?" Maria asked gently. Terrified, Catherine admitted, "I don't know how to explain to the children that their father is back, but that our family might look completely different going forward. How do you tell children that love isn't always enough to keep a family together?" "You tell them the truth in words they can understand," Maria said. "You let them see that it's possible to love someone and still need space to figure things out. You show them that families can be strong even when they're not perfect." Catherine nodded, knowing Maria was right, but still feeling overwhelmed by the responsibility of guiding her children through such complex emotional territory. The children had already been through so much, adapting to their father's absence with remarkable resilience. Now, she was asking them to navigate an even more uncertain future. William arrived at the palace at 3 o'clock, just as the children were returning from school. Catherine watched from her office window as his car pulled up to the private entrance, her stomach churning with anxiety. In a few minutes, they would be face to face again, this time with their children watching every interaction for clues about what their future held. She made her way to the family sitting room where they had agreed to meet. William was already there, standing nervously by the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back. He had chosen his clothes carefully, casual but neat, approachable but respectful. He looked like he had barely slept. "They're on their way up," Catherine said quietly. "Louis is very excited to see you. Charlotte is angry, but try not to show it. George is processing everything like the little adult he's becoming." William nodded, his jaw tight with emotion. "How do I do this, Catherine? How do I face them knowing what I've put them through?" "You be honest," she replied. "You apologize for the hurt you've caused, and you let them ask whatever questions they need to ask. And you don't make promises about the future unless you're absolutely certain you can keep them." Before William could respond, the sound of children's voices echoed in the hallway. Catherine's heart clenched as she heard Louis's excited chatter about seeing his papa, mixed with Charlotte's more subdued responses to her little brother's enthusiasm. The door opened, and Louis burst in, his face radiant with joy. "Papa!" he shrieked, launching himself across the room and into William's arms. The reunion was everything Catherine had hoped for and feared: pure emotion, uncomplicated love, and the painful reminder of what they had all been missing. William caught his youngest son and held him tight, his eyes closed against tears that threatened to fall. Over Louis's head, he watched George and Charlotte enter more cautiously, their faces carefully composed, but their eyes revealing the complexity of their emotions. "Hello, George." "Hello, Charlotte," William said softly, still holding Louis but making eye contact with his other children. "I've missed you all so very much." George stepped forward and offered his father a formal handshake, a gesture so adult and heartbreaking that Catherine had to look away. "Hello, Papa. How was your flight from Australia?" The politeness in his eldest son's voice was worse than anger would have been. George was protecting himself the only way he knew how, by retreating into formality and emotional distance. Charlotte remained by the door, her arms crossed defensively. "Why didn't you tell us you were coming back?" she asked, her voice sharp with accusation. "We're not little kids. We could have been prepared. William gently set Lewis down and knelt to be at eye level with his children. You're absolutely right, Charlotte. I should have called ahead, should have given you time to prepare. I made another mistake in a long series of mistakes, and I'm sorry. The apology seemed to surprise Charlotte, who had clearly been prepared for excuses rather than accountability. Her defensive posture softened slightly, though she remained wary. I want to explain to all of you why I was away for so long, William continued. And I want to answer any questions you have, even if the answers are difficult. They all settled into the comfortable seating area that had been the backdrop for countless family conversations over the years. Lewis immediately climbed onto William's lap, as if trying to make up for months of missed cuddles. George and Charlotte sat on either side of Catherine, their choice of positioning speaking volumes about where their loyalties currently lay. I left for Australia, planning to be gone for 2 weeks, William began. But while I was there, I started feeling overwhelmed by everything in my life. Not by you, he added quickly, seeing Lewis's worried expression, but by the responsibilities and pressure that come with being a prince. I felt like I couldn't breathe, like I was trapped in a life that was too big for me to handle. So you ran away, Charlotte stated bluntly. Yes, William admitted. I ran away instead of talking to your mother about how I was feeling, instead of asking for help, instead of remembering that families work through problems together. I ran away because I was scared and confused, and I made a choice that hurt all of you. George leaned forward slightly. But why didn't you come home when you realized you made a mistake? Mama said you kept extending your trip. Why did you keep choosing to stay away? The question was posed with 11-year-old directness, but it cut to the heart of the issue with surgical precision. William was quiet for a long moment, clearly struggling to explain adult anxieties to a child's understanding. Have you ever done something wrong and then felt so ashamed about it that you couldn't face the people you'd hurt? William asked. That's what happened to me. The longer I stayed away, the worse I felt about hurting you all. But the worse I felt, the harder it became to come home and face what I had done. Lewis, who had been listening with the intense concentration he usually reserved for his favorite stories, looked up at his father with wide eyes. Did you think we wouldn't love you anymore if you came back? The innocence of the question, the 6-year-old understanding that love should be unconditional, made both William and Catherine struggle to maintain their composure. I was confused about a lot of things, William said softly. But I know now that your love for me never changed, even when I made bad choices. Just like my love for you never changed, even when I was far away. Charlotte had been silent during this exchange, but now she spoke up with the brutal honesty that was her trademark. If you love us so much, why aren't you and Mama getting back together? Why are you staying at a hotel instead of in your bedroom where you belong? The question everyone had been avoiding hung in the air like a challenge. Catherine watched William's face carefully, knowing that his answer would shape how the children understood their family's future. Because love and trust are different things, William said carefully. I broke your mama's trust when I stayed away without explanation. I hurt her feelings and made her worry about whether I was coming back at all. Love doesn't automatically fix those kinds of hurts. Sometimes people need time and space to heal before they can be together again. George nodded slowly, his mature mind grasping the concept even if he didn't like it. So you might get back together, or you might not? We don't know yet, Catherine said, speaking for the first time since the children had arrived. What we do know is that Papa and I both love you 3 more than anything in the world. Whether we live together or separately, we're going to make sure you feel safe and loved. Lewis looked back and forth between his parents, his young mind struggling to process such uncertainty. But families are supposed to live together, he said plaintively. How can we be a family if Papa doesn't live here? It was Charlotte who answered, her voice gentler than it had been all afternoon. Some families live in different houses, but still love each other, she said. Remember Tommy from my class? His mom and dad don't live together anymore, but they both come to his school plays and football matches. They're still his family. The wisdom in her 9-year-old voice reminded Catherine how much her children had grown during William's absence, how they had been forced to develop emotional maturity beyond their years. The conversation continued for another hour, with the children asking questions that ranged from practical concerns about holidays and birthdays to deeper issues about trust and forgiveness. William answered each question honestly, never making promises he wasn't sure he could keep, but also never crushing their hope that their family might find a way back to wholeness. As the afternoon drew to a close, Louis fell asleep against his father's chest, exhausted by the emotional weight of the reunion. George and Charlotte had gradually moved closer to William during the conversation, their initial wariness giving way to cautious hope that their father was truly trying to make amends for his absence. "Can I come visit you at your hotel?" George asked as they prepared to say goodbye. "I mean, if Mama says it's okay." "I would love that," William said. "Maybe you could show me some of the projects you've been working on. I like to catch up on everything I missed." Charlotte hesitated before speaking, but finally asked, "Are you going to disappear again? If things get hard or confusing, are you going to run away?" William looked directly into his daughter's eyes, understanding that this question would determine whether she was willing to trust him again. "I can't promise that I won't feel scared or overwhelmed again," he said, "but I can promise that I will never disappear without explanation. If I'm struggling, I will talk to your mama or to the doctor I'm working with, but I won't run away from you ever again." It wasn't the absolute guarantee Charlotte wanted, but it was honest, and she seemed to appreciate his refusal to make promises he wasn't certain he could keep. As William prepared to leave, carrying a sleepy Louis to transfer him to Catherine's arms, the family dynamics had shifted yet again. The children now had context for their father's absence and a framework for understanding the uncertain path ahead. They had seen their parents communicate respectfully despite their problems and had been included in age-appropriate discussions about their family's future. "Thank you," William said quietly to Catherine as they stood in the doorway, "for letting me do this, for helping me explain things to them. I know it would have been easier to keep them from me until we figured everything else out." "They needed to see you take responsibility," Catherine replied, "and they needed to know that whatever happens between us, they still have a father who loves them." After William left, the children gathered around Catherine in the family room, processing the afternoon's revelations. The conversation had answered some questions but raised others, and Catherine knew they would need ongoing support as their family navigated this new reality. "Mama," Louis said sleepily, "do you think Papa will really stay this time?" Catherine looked at her youngest son, seeing William's eyes and her own stubborn chin, and felt the weight of all the uncertainty ahead. "I think Papa is going to try very hard to keep his promises," she said, "and we're going to help him by being honest about our feelings and patient while he learns how to be the father you deserve." It wasn't the fairy tale ending the children had hoped for, but it was a beginning. And sometimes Catherine was learning beginnings were more valuable than perfect endings. The weeks that followed William's return were unlike anything Catherine had experienced in their 20 years together. Their relationship existed in a strange limbo, neither married nor separated, co-parenting while living apart, navigating public duties while their private world remained fractured and uncertain. It was exhausting and hopeful and heartbreaking all at once. William had rented a modest apartment in Kensington, close enough to be present for the children, but separate enough to give them both space to process their complicated emotions. He visited the palace most afternoons, helping with homework, attending school events, and slowly rebuilding the daily connections that had been severed during his months away. The children responded to his consistency with cautious optimism, testing his commitment through small rebellions and emotional outbursts that he weathered with patience Catherine had never seen from him before. The public remained largely unaware of the crisis within the royal family. Palace communications had masterfully managed the narrative, explaining William's extended absence as an important diplomatic mission that had yielded significant benefits for Commonwealth relations. His return was characterized as the natural conclusion of successful work rather than a personal crisis resolution. Only the closest palace staff knew the truth, and their discretion was absolute. Catherine found herself learning to co-parent with someone who felt like a stranger. William was different since his return, more thoughtful, but also more fragile, as if his months in Australia had stripped away protective layers he had built over years of royal life. He spoke less, but listened more carefully. He asked permission before making decisions about the children that he once would have made automatically. He treated Catherine with a formal courtesy that was more painful than anger would have been. He's like a guest in his own family's life, she confided to Maria one evening after William had left from dinner with the children. He asks if he can help clear the table. He knocks before entering rooms he's been in thousands of times. It's like he's afraid to assume he belongs here anymore. Maybe he is afraid, Maria observed gently. He knows he broke something precious, and he's trying not to break anything else while he figures out how to repair the damage. Catherine understood the logic, but it didn't make the emotional distance any easier to bear. There were moments during family dinners when she would catch William watching her with an expression of such longing and regret that it took her breath away. But when she tried to bridge the gap between them, he would retreat into polite conversation about schedules and logistics. The children, meanwhile, were adapting to their new reality with a remarkable resilience that continued to amaze Catherine. George had appointed himself the family's emotional barometer, carefully watching both parents for signs of stress and stepping in to redirect conversations when topics became too heavy. Charlotte had begun having private conversations with William during their art sessions, slowly working through her anger while creating beautiful paintings that captured her complicated feelings. Louis had returned to his natural exuberance, but with occasional moments of clingy behavior that revealed his fear of another abandonment. 3 weeks after William's return, Catherine found herself in an unexpected situation. She had been attending a charity gala alone, as had become her routine during William's absence, when a photographer captured her looking particularly isolated among the crowd of couples. The resulting newspaper headline read, "Lonely Princess. Where is Prince William?" and was accompanied by speculation about trouble in their marriage that came dangerously close to the truth. The palace communications team worked swiftly to manage the story, but Catherine knew that their careful narrative was beginning to unravel. She called William that night to discuss how they should handle the increased media attention. "We need to make a decision," she said without preamble when he answered the phone. "Either we present a united front publicly while we figure things out privately, or we're going to find ourselves explaining a separation we haven't even officially decided on." William was quiet for a long moment. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that we attend the children's hospital charity ball together next week. Let ourselves be photographed looking comfortable with each other. Show the public that we're still a team, even if we're not sure what kind of team we are anymore." The suggestion felt strange even as she made it. Catherine was essentially proposing that they fake intimacy for public consumption while maintaining emotional distance in private. But the alternative was allowing speculation to spiral out of control, potentially affecting the children and certainly undermining their ability to do their royal duties effectively. "Are you sure you're comfortable with that?" William asked. "Pretending we're something we're not right now." "We're not pretending to be something we're not," Catherine corrected. "We're presenting the truth that we're working together for our family and our responsibilities, even while we're figuring out our personal relationship." That's not a lie. They agreed to attend the charity ball together, their first public appearance as a couple since William's return. The decision required careful coordination with their security teams, communication staff, and even their stylists to ensure they presented the right image of unity without appearing to be trying too hard. The night of the charity ball, Catherine stood in front of her mirror, adjusting the sapphire necklace William had given her for their 10th anniversary. She had chosen it deliberately, knowing that royal watchers would recognize its significance and interpret it as a symbol of their continuing connection. The irony that she was using jewelry to communicate a relationship status she wasn't even sure of herself wasn't lost on her. William arrived at the palace to collect her, looking handsome and nervous in his formal black tie attire. They had barely been alone together since their conversation in the blue drawing room, and the intimacy of sharing a car to the event felt both familiar and strange. "You look beautiful," he said as they settled into the back seat of their official car. "That necklace, I remember buying it for you." "I remember receiving it," Catherine replied, her voice neutral. "You said it matched my eyes." "It does," William said quietly. "It always has." The comment hung between them, carrying the weight of their shared history and uncertain future. Catherine found herself remembering the day he had given her the necklace, how he had fastened it around her neck while she was getting ready for a state dinner, how they had been late to the event because they couldn't keep their hands off each other. The memory felt like it belonged to different people. The charity ball was held at the Natural History Museum, its grand hall transformed into an elegant venue filled with London's social elite and generous donors. Catherine and William's entrance was photographed extensively, their body language analyzed by royal correspondents who noted their comfortable proximity and synchronized movements. They had attended so many events together over the years that their public performance was flawless, despite the emotional distance between them. Throughout the evening, they mingled with guests, delivered speeches about the importance of children's health care, and participated in the auction that raised substantial funds for the hospital. To outside observers, they appeared to be a devoted couple working together for causes they cared about. Only Catherine could feel the careful space William maintained between them, the way he avoided accidental touches, the formal politeness that had replaced their easy intimacy. During the dancing portion of the evening, social protocol demanded that they share at least one dance. As they moved together to a slow ballad that had played at their wedding reception, Catherine felt the full weight of everything they had lost and might never recover. "This is strange," William murmured as they swayed together, his hand carefully positioned on her waist, maintaining appropriate distance even as they appeared intimate to watching photographers. "What's strange?" Catherine asked. "Dancing with you, but feeling like I don't have permission to hold you properly," he replied, smiling for cameras while knowing that we might be doing this as strangers pretending to be married rather than as a married couple working through problems. Catherine looked up at him, seeing the confusion and pain in his eyes that he had become expert at hiding from public view. "We're not strangers, William. We're two people who loved each other enough to build a life together, and who are trying to figure out if that love is strong enough to rebuild what was broken." "Is it?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the music. "Is our love strong enough?" It was the question that haunted both of them, the central uncertainty around which all their other decisions revolved. Catherine had been asking herself the same thing for weeks, examining their relationship from every angle, trying to determine if what they had shared could survive the damage William's abandonment had caused. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "I know I still love you. I know you love me. But I don't know if love alone can fix the trust that was broken, or if we can build something new that's strong enough to withstand future pressures." The song ended, but they remained on the dance floor for a moment longer, both lost in the complexity of their situation. Around them, other couples continued dancing, oblivious to the profound conversation taking place in their midst. As the evening wound down, Catherine and William said their goodbyes and prepared to leave together. The car ride back to the palace was quiet, both of them processing the strange experience of performing intimacy while feeling emotionally distant. "The children will be asleep when we get back," Catherine said as they approached Kensington Palace. "Would you like to come in for coffee? We should probably talk about how tonight went and what it means for future appearances." William hesitated, and Catherine could see him weighing the professional necessity of debriefing against the personal danger of spending more private time together. "All right," he agreed finally, "but just for a few minutes." They settled in the small sitting room adjacent to the kitchen, the same space where they used to share late-night conversations about the children, about upcoming royal duties, about their dreams and fears for the future. Now they sat across from each other like negotiators, discussing their public image and media strategy. "I think it went well," Catherine said, curling her legs under her on the sofa. The photographers seemed satisfied, and I heard several people commenting on how nice it was to see us together again. The communications team will be pleased, William agreed. Though I suppose we'll need to decide how often we can realistically appear together without it becoming a strain. They talked logistics for a while, discussing upcoming events and appearances, trying to strike a balance between public expectations and private boundaries. But as the conversation wound down, they found themselves in the familiar silence that had become the hallmark of their interactions. "William," Catherine said finally, her voice soft in the quiet room. "Can I ask you something honestly?" He nodded, his attention focused entirely on her. "Do you want our marriage to work?" she asked. "Not what you think you should want, not what would be best for the children or the monarchy. What do you want?" William was quiet for so long that Catherine began to think he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "I want it more than I've ever wanted anything," he said. "But I'm terrified that wanting it isn't enough. I'm terrified that I'll hurt you again, that the pressure will become too much and I'll break under it. I'm terrified that you'll wake up one day and realize you're better off without me." The honesty in his voice broke through Catherine's carefully maintained emotional barriers. For the first time since his return, she saw not the distant stranger he had become, but the man she had loved for 2 decades, vulnerable and afraid but trying to find his way back to her. "I'm terrified too," she admitted. "I'm scared that even if we fix this, I'll never feel completely secure again. I'm scared that every time you travel, every time you seem stressed, I'll wonder if you're going to disappear. I'm scared that the woman who trusted you completely is gone forever." They looked at each other across the space of the small room, both acknowledging the depth of the damage that needed to be repaired. But for the first time since William's return, the conversation felt like progress rather than performance. "What if we tried?" William asked quietly. "Not rushing back into our old life, but building something new, with clear boundaries, honest communication, and help from people who know how to guide couples through this kind of crisis." Catherine felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of the tight grip she had kept on her emotions for months. "What would that look like?" "I don't know exactly," William admitted. "Therapy, both individual and together. Honest conversations about what drove me away and what it would take for you to trust me again. Time, patience, and the acceptance that we might fail despite our best efforts." The possibility hung between them like a fragile bridge across a chasm. Catherine could see the other side, could imagine a future where they had rebuilt their marriage on stronger foundations, but she could also see how easily the bridge might collapse if either of them lost their footing. "I need time to think about it," she said finally. "This conversation, the idea that we might really try to fix this, it's a lot to process." "Of course," William said immediately. "Take all the time you need. I'll be here, working on myself, proving to you and the children that I'm committed to being the man you deserve, whether that's as your husband or as your co-parent." As William prepared to leave, Catherine walked him to the door, a gesture that felt both natural and strange. They stood in the entryway where he had kissed her goodbye on thousands of ordinary mornings, where their children had hugged his legs before school, where their family life had played out in countless small, precious moments. "Catherine," William said as his hand reached for the door handle. "Tonight, dancing with you, talking with you like this, it reminded me of who we used to be together. Not the people trapped by royal duties and public expectations, but the people who fell in love and decided to build a life together. We're not those people anymore," Catherine replied gently. "Too much has happened. Too much has changed. But maybe we could become new people who love each other in a different way." After William left, Catherine remained in the entryway for a long time, thinking about the evening, the conversation, and the choice that lay ahead of her. Upstairs, her children slept peacefully, trusting her to make decisions that would shape their family's future. The responsibility felt enormous, but for the first time in months, it didn't feel impossible. She thought about the dance they had shared, the careful distance William had maintained, and the conversation that had followed. She thought about the man who had left her without explanation, and the man who had returned asking for nothing but the chance to prove he had changed. She thought about love and trust, about forgiveness and second chances, about the difference between the marriage she had lost and the marriage they might build together. The choice wasn't between the past and the future, Catherine realized. It was between fear and hope, between the safety of certainty and the risk of believing that broken things could be repaired. Tomorrow, she would begin to make that choice, one careful step at a time. Tonight, she would allow herself to hope that love really could be enough, if they were brave enough to fight for it.